go. Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, virtual audience. I'm so pleased that we finally get Paul on an evening because mostly he's here on a Sunday afternoon. And last year I took him out for a really terrible brunch. But
It
this
wasn't that
time,
bad.
yes, it was. It, well, it was in a great place, but it was just a terrible brunch. But this time we had a very nice time over at Francine in the mall, which was great. So I think of this book as a tapestry of Mike Bowditch and the people in his lives ranging around in time. So while it may look to you like stories, it really isn't. I mean, they are different, but it's I don't think calling it a short story collection is in any way descriptive of what this book actually is. You agree, right?
No, I agree. It's
Okay.
I don't even know how to describe it exactly. It's
Try tapestry. I really like
tapestry
that.
sounds great.
I really like that, because it weaves a whole lot. I mean, we get to see Charlie Stevens when Mike is a brand new ranger and he's mentoring. We get to see Aura before the plane crash that cripples her. We get to see Jack, Mike's father again, Jack Bowditch, who's a real criminal. And we get to meet some truly appalling people. And I asked Paul if he actually knew people like this. And what was
Sadly,
your
yes.
answer? And your answer was,
Yes, it's. I said in one of the books, maybe it's actually in this story, a story in this collection, that nobody knows rural poverty better than game wardens. They see it. They see the end of every dirt road, and I've ridden along with a lot of them. I have friends who live in these places, and they will take me to that part of. I hesitate to call it a town because very often it's not a town per se. But yeah, I've seen some interesting sights that I don't want to see again.
hold it up. It is. Okay, great. I would say because so many of these people in your stories are basically subsistence living, other than beer, which appears to be. You think of Maine as like water and coastal, but as far as I can tell, the people they float on beer. That's the deal. But I mean, so they really do. They're out there hunting. They're out there fishing. They're doing. It's a real subsistence group that you have mostly in these, not all, but in these stories.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about a lot of these rural locations is that there are people who live there because their families have always lived there, and they can't even imagine living anywhere else, and certainly don't have the means to live anywhere else. But then you have people who live there because they don't want to be near anybody else. It's something I observed too on Maine's coastal islands. It's like generally somebody ends up on an island for a reason. And it's the same with some of these backwoods, although it's a little bit darker.
Well, Dana Stabenow, years ago, when she was writing one of her books about Alaska with Kate Strugak, said the thing about frontier states, and Maine is, a border state and all, is they attract the radical left and the radical right. People who really want to live in that environment. And certainly I think that this book reflects that. You have people who, as you say, some of them are there because that's all they've ever known, but some of them actually choose to be there. And I thought the hardest story for me to read was the one about the vet who brought back a bride from Vietnam. And I mean, truly, that was I thought in many ways the most tragic story. These are all fairly dark, but that story. So what was your inspiration for that one?
Boy. So my father was in the Army during the Vietnam War. He didn't have to go to Vietnam, but he was a psychologist who was based at Fort Knox, and he was dealing with everybody coming back from combat. And he would tell me later about what these guys were dealing with, The one that stuck in my mind because I was a kid was the guy who came back with elephantiasis. So Vietnam has kind of loomed large, I think, in my mind, and there are, a lot of veterans did bring back wives, and Some of those stories have turned out wonderfully, and I wanted one that turned into a gothic horror story, essentially.
It certainly does. So this is a woman from a wealthy family. You don't really ever tell us how come she married this guy, which I find deeply suspicious. But not you're not telling us, but the fact that she would. But anyway,
Yeah, I think the thing is that, in brief, the story's called Rabid, and I wanted to. It started with a very, high concept idea, which is, I'd like to write about human rabies in humans. Like, how would that manifest itself? And then, well, what if the guy may or may not be succumbing to rabies? And somehow this got all tangled up with a Vietnam vet and his wife, who he's dragged into the remote Maine woods and is beyond miserable because he's abusive and abuses substances and that sort of thing. And Charlie and Aura are trying to help this woman, who maybe doesn't need their help, as it turns out. It's a complicated story, and I don't want to give away where it goes.
I didn't want you to. I mean, the rabies comes from a bat. It appears that this guy has been bitten in the face, it appears, by a bat. But I keep thinking of this woman, marooned in sort of a tent in the North Woods, and she has a daughter, and coming from, a life of privilege to this absolute, rock bottom subsistence living with a drunk, abusive husband, what would that be like?
No, I mean, her isolation is about as absolute as you can imagine. She barely speaks the language. She relies on her little daughter to translate for her, and she wants out. And how she tries to achieve that is the essence of it. Yes, it's the essence of the story. So,
and actually, Aura plays a pretty significant role in this story. As I said, we get to see Aura before she is paralyzed in the plane crash, so she's able to move around and do things.
Yeah, that was, ultimately one of the aspects of these stories that I think is most interesting for people who have been reading the series, is that they fill in the gaps between the novels, or they discuss episodes that help illuminate some of the characters that you've gotten to know through the novels. You see them as younger people. The title story, Skin and Bones, is sort of the case. I don't want to call it a case, but it's the series of incidents in which Charlie Stevens and Mike's dad kind of team up, but also end up as enemies by the end, but sort of locked together in this very twisted way.
Well, we haven't seen Jack a lot for obvious reasons if you've read the series, but he's a very complicated guy, and it was interesting to see. He too is a Vietnam vet, and marked by it. Was interesting to see what his kind of moral compass, if he has one, what it would be in this story. My husband, who has never read Paul, I took my advanced reading copy along on our trip, and Rob read it, and he absolutely was riveted to it. He told me that Skin and Bones would just, amaze me. And so I left it in the L'Hôtel de l'Europe in Avignon, and I didn't leave a card or anything in it, so I will never know. But I thought afterwards, too bad, I should have left a card so somebody could give me feedback and either say, "Are you nuts?" Or "Boy, I really love this." But anyway, the stories are all different. They're all dark, but they're all different, except at the end. Those of you who are here, did you read the last book where, we're in Canada, that it ends up with Mike chasing the baddies into Canada. Well, the last story in the book, Stacy is pregnant, and there's a reaction to that book. You want to tell us? Because I don't think you're giving anything away by talking about that story a bit.
No, I mean that. So this is the novel is Pitch Dark, which is also out in paperback now, and it ends with a lot of cliffhangers. Let's put it that way.
Mike breaking a lot of rules.
Yes, Mike breaks a lot of rules. It takes place right on the main Quebec border, and it's Mike Bowditch is literally the guy who crosses lines, and in this case, the line is the international border, in pursuit of a fugitive, and this last story, Sheep's Clothing, kind of shows a little bit of the aftermath of that professionally for Mike, and then personally, as Barbara was saying, his wife is now pregnant, and so we get to see her. She, you'll have to wait for the birth. 2026.
Is pushing you into the next book, which you'll be delighted to know has already been written. So, you have that security, that knowing that, yes, right. I like that there are consequences, for Mike, because he is oftentimes, well, he's always a rule breaker, but sometimes, maybe in his own concept of justice, maybe goes farther. Well, he certainly goes farther than the warden service would like. And that's another thing that shows you is the politics of the warden service. If you're a CJ Box reader, you already know, what that's all like. In fact, this is an ideal series for people who read CJ. If you haven't read CJ and you like this series, you should try CJ. But it appears that any kind of, I don't want to say paramilitary, but any kind of structured organization that has, legal or some kind of authority over other people winds up with, it's the FBI, it's the Game Warden Service, it's the local police department, doesn't seem to matter. Michael Conley writes about this, extensively in his new book, Nightshade, which is terrific if you haven't read it, and is a new character and takes place on Catalina Island and is very different from Harry Bosch. And so in here we see that Mike is really, we know that, but he's really bucking up against, and is it, which, I don't remember which story it is, where his companion Ranger Volk, is that his name? Yes. It's a total asshole all the way through.
Yeah, one of the things about the Maine game wardens, and this, I don't know how generally true this is of conservation law officers across the country, but Maine game wardens are fully sworn officers of the law. They go to the Maine Criminal Justice Academy, where they train alongside the state troopers, the sheriff's deputies, the municipal police. Then they go to an advanced warden academy where they learn how to catch you poaching and that kind of thing, right? But as a result, a game warden in Maine can arrest you for speeding, littering, or rape, quite honestly. Anything, and because game wardens are required to live in their district, very often a game warden is the first law enforcement officer on the scene, no matter what the crime is, because it's not true, for instance, of sheriff's deputies. You don't have to live in the county. You have to commute in, of course. So it's given me a lot to work with the idea that they're not just sort of rangers, they're rural cops, and the forest is their beat. These are some of the books are more police procedurals than not. Some of the stories are more sort of focused around what Barbara was saying, which is the inner workings and jealousies and rivalries of any, law enforcement agency. But that's always supposed to be kind of the background, right, to the story. And, of course, the story is always about what does this do to Mike Bowditch? what does he learn or not learn, or how does he changed by the incidents in this particular story?
Well, one of the stories we find out why Mike decides he wants to be a warden investigator, which is a role then he plays in several of the books. I mean, he has a fairly rocky career here and I assume it's going to go on being a rocky career.
Yes, it is. It's actually going to get rockier. As hard as that may be for my longtime readers to imagine. So years ago, I had a game warden friend who was a great source for me. We went on ride-alongs all the time. He also, was the union rep for wardens who got into trouble. So everybody, who got hauled in front of a disciplinary hearing, he was there. And one day he remarked to me, he said, "Paul, I've been in all of these hearings. There is nothing that Mike Bowditch has done that would get him fired." Which was a shock to me because, of course, I thought, oh, my God, I'm just really stretching it here. The little coda to this is this warden was subsequently fired. Or I should say he left before he could be. So evidently there is a line, but Mike hasn't crossed it.
That's astonishing. I would have thought he'd way crossed it. But, that's one of the things in the series in general I really like is that Mike does go back and forth. I know the last book he went into Quebec, but you had an earlier book where the thing is set on a community. You're right on the border. And I thought that was one of your most interesting stories, where the Canadian community, and that's true in like Montana, Minnesota, all along the, and I also think it's a good thing you wrote that book last year.
Yeah, I mean,
you would have a much harder time writing it now.
Well, yes, actually, I've wanted to write about, obviously Maine is a border state, but we haven't given until recently much thought to the Canadian border.
The longest undefended border in the world.
Yes, for now.
For now, exactly.
But, and part of the reason why I didn't want to write about it was the Border Patrol went through a series of ups and downs and was changing. I did ride-alongs with Border Patrol agents, and I trying to kind of write about them at a stable moment in their agency career, agency existence was hard for me. But finally, I decided I have to do one. The time has come. I really want to tackle the fact that Maine is a border state. A similar thing is going on right now, which is actually the book that I have in mind next may or may not be set around Acadia National Park. But, of course, who knows what the National Park Service is going to look like in 2027, right? So
it's probably going to be owned by 3 or 4 oligarchs.
Which, ironically, Acadia was owned by 3 or 4
That's
oligarchs
right.
who gave it to the federal government.
Right. I didn't mean to digress into politics. I don't know why I'm doing. Probably the reaction to being in France. So all this. So how long did you work on these stories? This isn't something you just threw together.
No. So the stories. What was interesting was when I was asked to assemble them into this collection, I was looking at pieces that I had written over the course of about 8 years. Now, usually when I'm editing something, it's something I've written in a year. And this gave me a much broader view of my style changing, my preoccupations changing. As Barbara said, one of the things that I was quite surprised about myself was how dark the stories are. This is the crossover book for Stephen King fans, I think.
No, there's nothing supernatural in it.
No supernatural,
no,
but they're pretty great. Some of them are very dark.
But everything is real. So I don't know that Stephen King is the right analogy. I
Probably
have
not.
to think about that. Right. Anyway, yeah. So, why did you write them? I mean, what was the impulse that led you to write any short story?
So, let's see, what year was it? 2013. I got a phone call from a game warden sergeant who said, I have a story for you that is going to be an international phenomenon. He had just captured this semi-legendary criminal who came to be called the North Pond Hermit. And for many years, this guy, people weren't exactly sure that he existed. He had been burglarizing homes in this lake district for decades, but they weren't sure that it was this one guy. And this game warden sergeant had caught him and got him to lead him to his camp in the woods, which was this amazing. I mean, it wasn't very far from a road, but it was well hidden, and it was fueled with propane tanks, and
It had tarps.
and he
That
had
blended in with
tarps.
the-
And
you
yeah, he
describe
really,
it really well.
he was really something else. Anyway, so he said, "I'll take you there right now," because he just caught this guy like hours earlier, and he said, you should write a book about this guy." And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I said, I don't know that I want to, because I was afraid that it would glamorize this man, for one thing. But I also said, I'm not really a nonfiction writer along these lines. I don't know that I can get this guy to talk to me. I don't know if I'm going to want him. I'm going to believe him, et cetera, et cetera. Well, so instead I wrote this story, which is the first story in the collection. It's called The Bear Trap. And it's about a fictional hermit that Charlie Stevens, as a rookie warden, is pursuing. And it became my first story. Meanwhile, or many years later, the journalist Michael Finkel decided to write about the North Pond Hermit, got him to talk, and his book, The Stranger in the Woods, has been on bestseller lists for the last half decade or more. So there was the story was an international phenomenon. It was covered in the Australian media and, translated into all kinds of languages and stuff. But I'm happy with what I did. But it did kick off my interest in writing short stories. And more to the point was this story was set at a time before Mike met Charlie. Charlie's telling Mike, years ago, there was this hermit, and it kind of opened my mind to this idea that, hey, the stories could do this for me. They didn't have to be. I mean, they could stand on their own, but they could also work within the context of the series. So, I think my hope for the collection, quite honestly, is that for people who have been reading the series, this is going to fill in a lot of gaps for you. On the other hand, as Barbara was saying, I think there are going to be people who have never read anything by me before who are going to be able to pick this up, and the stories all make sense on their own. And I think they give I don't know how you feel about this, Barbara, but I think they give a pretty accurate view of sort of my tone, my shifts in tone. There's some is funny, some is scary, some is procedural, some is, I don't know what you want to call it. So it's a little bit of a sampler.
It is a sampler. We have not mentioned the wolf, but the wolf is in the book. He's a great character.
Yeah. So Mike, years ago, on a whim, I had Mike encounter a wolf dog, and it had to do with a real life experience I had on the Maine-New Hampshire border, in the backwoods again, visiting this wolf dog sanctuary that this very interesting man had in the middle of nowhere. And he was getting wolf dogs from all around the country because they're often euthanized because they're very unpredictable. Wolves are wild, dogs are domesticated, and their offspring are, you never know what you're going to get. So I decided to work in a wolf dog into my book Widowmaker, and little did I know that after I finished that book and it was published, that I would be barraged with emails from people saying, "When's the wolf dog coming back? When's the wolf dog coming back?" And I was like, "No, the wolf dog will not come back. I am the author. I get to make these decisions. And then one day I said, well, actually, there is a way that I could bring this dog back. And I did, and he has remained probably the second most popular character, maybe after Charlie. Maybe he's the most popular character. I don't know.
Craig Johnson brought that up last night because Walt Longmire has a dog called Dog, and in this new book, Return to Sender, where he's trying to find a missing male woman who has a 330-mile route that she does every day around Wyoming. Walt's companion, as he tries to go undercover and fails dismally, is Dog. I mean, everybody else is back in Absaroka County, and Walt is down there. And we talked about the fact that the dog actually appears to understand Walt. They seem to have a sort of a conversation. And one of these stories, you can see that maybe the dog, and Mike have some understanding, because Mike does something, takes him somewhere, which, was risky.
Yeah, Mike, in the last story, Sheep's Clothing, which, wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Mike takes a risk and sort of brings him out into the field. It doesn't, it could go worse, I would say. It doesn't go well, maybe. But, in terms of writing this Shadow, the wolf dog, I think one of the things that's probably what makes him compelling to readers is that he's a wolf dog. He is half wild animal and half domestic animal, and his whole life, of course, is a mix of that. He was raised by a guy in Montana who raises wolf dogs. He was traded by various criminals across the country, ends up in Maine, and then spends a few years after he escapes in the Maine mountains as a wild animal, and then Mike has to sort of re-domesticate him, but he's always aware of the fact that this animal always has this look in his eye where it was like, geez, can I touch him? Should I? And I think that's the fact that, yes, he is becoming friendlier, maybe more domesticated again to Mike, but
he likes Stacy better than Mike.
Yes, he does. I mean, this is the thing, is that Mike is jealous because his new wife gets along better with the wolf dog than
right.
he does.
I really like that.
Yeah.
So we should talk for a moment about the short story form. The short story isn't enough to support a novel. It's one idea. It's one targeted action. And so you can do things in short stories that, you can't make a whole book out of it. And the reason I call this a tapestry is because, in fact, it is a whole book. I don't think of this as a collection of stories at all. But it did give you an opportunity to write some things that you could not turn into an entire Mike Bowditch novel, or that Charlie gets to be the main character,
right.
Or,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was so much fun about writing the stories individually was that I could do whatever I wanted with them. And so, for instance, a lot of times I think because the novels are all narrated by Mike Bowditch, there's this question of like, well, Paul, do you know that Mike is as impulsive and reckless and occasionally jerky, And so I got to write a book in which I write a story that was in the third person. It's somebody is observing Mike, and this narrator kind of thinks Mike's a jerk. And so it was my little way of commenting, I think, to readers who wonder about this, like, do I know, my own character? I also there's another story in it, in this collection called, or the tapestry, called The Caretaker. And I wanted to write a Sherlock Holmes story in which Charlie was Holmes and Mike was his Watson. And I borrowed a bunch of names from Conan Doyle, set them in. It's very much a Paul Doiron story, but the beats are Holmesian. And this was actually available digitally a few years back. And I remember, I don't usually look at Amazon reviews because I want to stay sane. Um, but I happened to encounter an Amazon review that said, "Who wrote this story? This is not Paul Doiron. This is some British guy," which was like the highest compliment I could have gotten, right? So yeah, that's what is the fun about doing the stories is you can experiment and hey, this works, this doesn't work.
So if you decide to do it again, the narrator that is missing is Stacy. And I have never forgotten Stacy appearing at the beginning of, I don't remember the title because I'm terrible on them, but she's in Florida.
Yes.
And the pythons. I mean, that was, for those of you who've read the whole series, you remember that? Stacy and the Python.
Stacy and the Python.
Oh my God, it was amazing. So I think if you decide to
Yeah.
write more, Stacy does not have, she appears,
Right.
but she does not have a story of her own here.
I think one of the reasons for that is I introduced her way, way back. I mean, she's actually mentioned briefly in The Poacher's Son, the very first book. And did I know that she and Mike were going to get together then? I think some part of me did. You know, I mean, I didn't, at that point, quite honestly, I didn't know if I was going to write more than one book. But if I ever did, yeah, you know. And then she's a very, when I brought her into the series, the idea was Mike is going to get involved with a woman who's even more reckless than he is. Where in their partnership, he's going to be the responsible one. And what is that going to look like? And it's kind of a mess initially, and she has to kind of go away to begin to get her stuff together. And she goes to Florida at one point and is working with a nonprofit that's trying to protect Florida panthers. And Mike happens to be down there because game warden investigators do background checks on wardens. This person who's applied was formerly from Florida, so he goes down there. He gets together with Stacy. She says, do you want to come with me on this python hunt? Because Burmese pythons have taken over the Everglades. And yeah, it's quite a scene. It was fun to write.
It's very, yeah.
And that was One Last Lie. That was the book One Last Lie.
They've been wonderful books. How many of them are there now?
So there are 15 novels, and then this is the 16th. The 17th is written.
Yay.
It will come out in June of 2026. I'm not sure that the title has formally been approved by all the powers that be at Macmillan. So I hesitate to announce it here, but I like it.
Right.
All of the titles are mine. Some of them are my first choice, and then some of them are my 20th choice. But
well, still, that's not a bad average. I do think that the cover here. Tell us a little bit about why the cover is going to appeal to at least Mainers, if no one else.
Well, one of the things that's always a challenge is, of course, Maine is most famous as a coastal state, but the game wardens have very little to do on the water, on the ocean, I should say. They will sort of team up with the Marine Patrol or other agencies to enforce sea duck hunting laws. We have some islands that have huntable game on them. There's some that have deer.
One overpopulated by deer, as
Yes,
we all remember.
That's a sort of a historical island that they ended up getting rid of all their deer. They hired basically this unique individual from Connecticut, whose job, he's at the Yale PhD, and his job is a deer assassin.
Really?
He goes around to Princeton, New Jersey, and if Princeton, New Jersey wants their deer gone, he makes sure they're all gone.
There's another story. We have two
Yes.
now. We have Stacy.
I know. I should write
we
about.
have the deer assassin.
Yeah,
We're
I mean,
rolling.
he's a PhD. I mean, this guy's really he is the
definitely
best
needs a
at what he
story.
does.
No, he definitely needs one.
Yes, you're right. Now, okay, you're giving me an idea, Barbara. Thank you.
When I get up to 8, we'll have a book. I know. Seriously, yeah. The deer assassin is a brilliant title.
But anyway, so most of the stories by circumstance just can't take place on the water. I sort of have to work hard to.
Well, you did have the one that's on the lake, the interior.
Yes,
But not, you're talking about the ocean.
Yeah, the ocean.
Right.
And actually, in this book, I think there's only one of the stories that's set on the ocean, but you know, knowing how marketable the Maine coast is, I think that my publisher wisely chose to sort of focus on that for the cover. So yeah, I've already had some booksellers in Maine say, "Oh, this will do really well," because people who are visiting Maine as tourists, they're there. There's some I've seen statistics where something 90-something% never venture west of I-95 or even Route 1, which goes right up the coast. I mean, our visitors, by and large, stick right to the coast.
Not me. I have
Not you.
driven the back roads. Maine was a great paper state and had some. There was another Maine author. Here we go again. Gene. What's his last name? I think his name was Gene, and he wrote some wonderful books. And
Jerry Boyle.
thank you. I was close. See
Jerry
how
Boyle,
good he
yeah.
is? Right. Yeah, well,
Yep.
it was, I was there. But
Yeah.
anyway, Jerry wrote wonderful books that I really liked. And his books were set in interior Maine. And
Yep.
so when we went to Maine, I wanted to is it the Erstock River? What's the name of the river? There's a big river, starts with an A.
There's an Androscoggin River.
That's
Maybe
it.
That's
The
one, yeah.
Androscoggin,
Yeah.
proving once again.
She is.
Yeah.
It's like, is this
but
guy
I
a
mean,
phony?
But it's absolutely gorgeous. The interior of
It is.
Maine is truly fabulous.
Well, and as a Mainer too, I mean, that's one of the things that prompted me to write the series was there was so much of the state that hadn't been written about in
Right.
fiction at that time. As years go on, you see more and more of it. But it's interesting, actually, when I go to do events in inland Maine, libraries, I do high school visits, and high school visits, I think most of all, the kids will come up to me and it's like, you're writing about our Maine. And it's really moving. I mean, I never thought that, I never set out to write books, to go to high schools, to be stunned by how appreciative these kids are. But it is, I'm trying to write about my Maine, essentially, which includes both the coast and the inland pieces.
So who has jurisdiction over like the lobster fishermen and all? Is that a totally different
It
department?
is. It's called the Marine Patrol, and it's a very. They will do some boating enforcement, I think, if they, have to. But primarily, their job is sort of policing the commercial fisheries of Maine. So they will stop lobster boats and check terms, mussels, oysters, all those sorts of things. So it's like when you're driving down the highway and you see the state police have pulled over the commercial truckers. That's kind of like the Marine Patrol. That's their job, except it's boats.
Why are there so many writers who live in Maine? You have a
Yeah,
lot
we
of,
do have
of
a lot of
authors
writers.
who live there.
Well, it was a state that many years ago had lots of writers. It attracted, they were homegrown writers. Stephen King, of a great example. Carolyn Chute, who isn't mentioned as much anymore, but was a huge influence on me. She wrote a book called The Beans of Egypt, Maine, which was a phenomenon in the 80s. But then, it's beautiful, and it attracted, Ann Beattie, Richard Ford, Richard Russo. He came to write about, he came to teach at Colby. That was his job, and then he was writing about Maine. But then we got a new wave after COVID, because it was one of those states where people had second homes and moved to their second homes to escape New York City, for instance, and never left. And so I'm constantly surprised by learning that, some acclaimed writer lives 5 miles from me.
Well, you've got Tess Gerritsen, you've got
Yes.
Michael Carita. I mean,
Yeah, they live
there's-
in my town.
Yeah. There's a cozy writer, too. His name is escaping me, but she's written a whole bunch.
Trying to think.
I'm
Who's it?
sorry, I'm drawing a complete blank again.
I
Um,
should know.
A little tired. Now she's writing about the chocolate, whatever. But anyway,
Oh, Sarah Graves.
thank you, Sarah. See, he can do it. Isn't he good?
Just give me a moment.
It's like a quiz. It's like a quiz program. She started out writing. I mean, her paperback, her first one about the house and the whole bit, was one of
Yeah.
our best-selling paperbacks ever.
Sarah's good.
And then
yeah.
she kind of veered off into the chocolate bakery or whatever. Very very cozy. But her
Yeah.
original books were not like that. I thought they were absolutely wonderful. And then I mentioned Jerry Boyle, whose books I adore. And Patrick can come out and remind me. Patrick, Jan Willem van de Vettery.
Yes.
What was the name of his main detective?
Oh gosh.
Because I mean, he wrote a whole. He was Dutch.
Yes, there were two.
Yeah,
Uh,
something like that.
Yeah, Jan Willem van de Vettering,
Right. Who was Dutch
who was Dutch,
and apparently
moved to the Maine coast.
right.
And I think he wrote one book that was at least one book that was set in Maine. Although most of his books were set in Amsterdam, I believe. A
He
couple
did
of them,
a
yeah.
couple in Maine, and
Yeah.
then John Connolly has
Yeah, well,
sent Charlie Parker.
John Connolly and I actually worked at the same hotel. He was, this. I don't know. I won't question whether John was a legal worker at the time. He was working at the
He's
Black Point
undercover
Inn.
Irish.
He was a young man, and we were not there at the same time, but it's one thing we have in common actually is that we both worked at this resort hotel on the ocean. Prout's Neck is where it is, which was most
Yeah.
famous for Winslow Homer. That's where he painted his masterpieces.
Are you friends? Do you know him?
I do know John. Yes, actually, yeah. John and he came to me. It was a number of years ago now, for information about how you gut a deer. He needed to know this for a book. And it's like, okay, once you've shot the deer, what happens? And it's like, okay. And I sat him down and I said, okay, you do this and you do this and you do this, and you got to be very careful not to nick that, unless you want to contaminate all the meat, kind of thing. It was a fun. Yeah, I like John. He's a very imaginative, colorful man.
Very, very, lovely
Yeah.
guy. We're very fond of him here. So I have one request. If you are going to write a book about Acadia National Park,
Yes.
I have been there maybe 6 times with Bar Harbor
Mm-hmm.
and all, and my most vivid memory, aside from the wooden church, which I truly love, is the blueberry ice cream. So I want you to include the ice cream store in Bar Harbor.
Yes.
It has the most astonishing ice cream.
It is good
ever.
ice cream, I will admit. President Obama, when he was president, had visited Bar Harbor, went into this place and gave it a massive boost.
2nd Street Inn, if you walk in from the cruise port, on the right.
It's hard to miss.
On the left, yeah, you can't
Yeah,
miss it. But
yeah.
I mean, so, Acadia is a truly fascinating
It is. It's
place that, as you point out, was originally developed by wealthy people.
yeah, the Rockefeller.
There were
actually.
cars were not allowed, if I recall, and
Right.
yeah, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's truly beautiful.
They sort of bought up all this island, Acadia. Mount Desert Island, which is it is an island. During low tides you can almost walk across, but it's it's these huge mountains. There's a fjord, the only one in the eastern United States.
Where does the Appalachian Trail end? It's Mount.
The Appalachian Trail ends on the top of Mount Katahdin.
That's a Katahdin.
Although they've continued a trail, in theory, beyond that
Okay.
to the Canadian border. But
So Paul and I were talking about dinner, about a new book called Heartwood by, is it Amity Gage?
yes,
I think so. See, I got that one right. But basically, it's a story about a woman who wanders off the or she disappears off the Appalachian Trail, and it's really an amazing book. It's our notable new fiction book for May, I think, or April. Can't remember which. But it also involves wardens who have to go and look for her. And Paul was saying it's based upon,
It's based upon a real incident.
but it has a different outcome. But it's based
The real
upon.
the real incident was a very tragic story, which I don't know that I want to even get into the
No.
details, but yeah, the war she was missing for over 2 years, and obviously it didn't end well. But it was this mountainous section of the trail. The the main stretch of the Appalachian Trail, in Maine it's the Appalachian Trail. In Georgia, it must be the Appalachian
It
Trail,
is.
right?
I spent too much time in Southwest
but,
Virginia, right?
But it's sort of famously very difficult, more
Yes.
difficult than the other
And in
most of the other sections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the lower regions, it's covered on both sides by rhododendron hills. And there are always terrible stories of particularly children who wander into the rhododendron hills and then can't get out, you know. But up in Maine, it's a different problem.
Yeah, we actually have part of the Appalachian Trail is in Maine is called the Hardest Mile. And this is by the thru hikers, and it's because you have to go like between boulders and through cracks. Like you're doing a little spelunking as well as hiking, and
It's not a good idea to do this by yourself.
no, it's not. Quite honestly, I don't think it's a good idea to do it by yourself in general, but people do, of course, many do.
Yeah. But anyway, you have not written a story about Mike and the Appalachian Trail.
I do. Yeah, the precipice does cover
Close,
some of it.
yeah.
But it's and that's a really interesting community. The thru hikers who do that every year it is a community. They take on trail names and.
Right. Do they always go from south to north? Do
No.
people ever start at Mount Caden and go the other direction?
The reason that they start in the south is because you can get an earlier start, right? In Springer Mountain, Georgia, you can get started on the trail in March.
Right.
So the people who start on Katahdin and then go south usually are wanting to challenge themselves, want to go fast. Crazy. That's your word, not mine.
Right.
But yeah, that is a thing. There's a term for them. It's probably Southers or something. I don't know. But
Well, you'd have a better climate for the whole thing if you start in the south
you
and
do
move north.
Yeah.
Then
To
if
go
you-
the other way is just
You'd wind up in Georgia when you don't ever want to be
Exactly.
in Georgia, which is like June or something.
Right.
Yuck. Or July. Right.
Yes.
Well, how about questions from all of you?
This is it. I've got 36 hours in Scottsdale. In theory, I have a vacation, but no. What was nice was that I did have a little extra time to write the novel that's coming out next year, and I'm proud of it. I'm really happy with what I was able to do with that time. But the reality also is that what I enjoy doing overlaps so much with the research for these books that it's like I'm in 2 weeks I'm going tuna harpooning.
Tuna harpooning.
Tuna harpooning.
What does that have to do with Maine?
It's in Maine.
We have
blue what do you call it, bluefin tuna, and they are schooling fish, and they chase smaller fish close to the surface. A lot of lobstermen sort of jury rig their boats with flying decks and this sort of thing to be able to spot them and get close to them. They're also fished for with massive hooks as well. But my friend goes out on this whatever you call it. There's a term for it too. I'm not that nautical, but And yeah, the tuna gets close to the surface, and he throws a harpoon at it. The thing is with harpooning, contemporary harpooning is you electrocute the fish. There's
Oh.
there's a wire that the harpoon is connected to, and there has to be somebody on the boat who, as soon as the harpoon pierces the tuna, you press the button, and that's what kills the fish.
So if you press too soon, the guy holding the
I don't know. We'll find out. If yes, yeah. Yes, you're. It's like it's up for grabs. Is that better or worse than Queequeg? But
I'm imagining a modern Moby Dick now.
yes. Well, I'm really looking forward to this experience because I'm wondering what's going to come. Is there going to be a book that comes out of this, or a story?
I'm sure you could work one in.
Probably.
Ideally, when the harpoon doesn't strike a fish, but rather a person. Well, I mean, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, you could do that.
So where do you go from there? Or where do you go to harpoon?
Well, this guy is a lobsterman most of the year on Monhegan Island. So at the mid coast is the whole coast gets bluefin. We don't get the really big, I mean, occasionally you will get a fish that's worth $10,000, and for export to Japan. Yeah, sashimi grade kind of thing. They have always been there. They are a cold water fish. Yeah, so it's an open question about what their future is. The Gulf of Maine is actually the fastest warming body of water in the world.
It's terrible for lobsters.
It's very terrible for lobsters. Yeah, shrimp. Yes, so Maine used to have a very active shrimp fishery. Our shrimp were like literally shrimp, like shrimp as in small, as opposed to Gulf shrimp. And it was a big fishery, a wintertime fishery, and they got cleared out, essentially, and they're gone.
Do you know that we have an active shrimp industry here in Arizona?
I did not.
Absolutely, freshwater shrimp. Yeah, very big
Wow.
deal. It's on the road that connects I-10 to I-5, I think it is. It's further than that, I think. But anyway, yeah. So, I mean, who knew? I was really surprised by that one day. But, yeah. Are they? Well, shrimp are hardy. They're sort of like cockroaches or something. They survive at surprising places. But, right. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how different is it writing short stories than novels? I mean, it just seems to me like it's such a different discipline, different structure. Is it really different?
Yeah, most of the stories in here are actually kind of longish.
In fact, one could call Skin and Bones
Skin
a
and Bones is
novella
really, it's almost
yeah.
a novella. I call it a novelette.
Well, the real difference is
Was it?
Is the yeah,
Wouldn't surprise me.
right.
Actually, I did a book signing once in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Martha and the Vandellas were in the streets for there was a music, and I was so psyched. It was like historical for me to see Martha and the Vandellas. What were your questions? Short stories, yes. I think if some of these stories are, as I said, are longer and deserve the length. One of them is quite short, and I liked writing at that length as well. I'll probably take a break from short stories for a little while now, but yeah, to get back to what Barbara
It's the
said.
same set of tools. It's just that you have a singular
Yeah.
focus. In a novel, it's I keep using the word tapestry. You have to weave together several things in order to make it a novel. In a short story, you just have one story arc. And so, but otherwise, it's the same skill set. It's just a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, as a magazine editor, yeah, articles are written sort of to fill short spaces, and so it wasn't the first time I had to do, be ruthlessly cutting and that kind of thing. But
Right. Anyone else? You had a question, sir.
Sure. One of the great things about this bookstore is how many new authors it's introduced me to.
Oh, well, I'm delighted to hear that. And you know what? It wouldn't work if you didn't come.
I opened up my email and says Maine, and so I found a book that Arizonans might like, very short story, Snake Bit,
yes,
which was a lot of fun to read. I finished it earlier today.
thank you.
But I'm a survivor
Of a snake bite.
no,
Oh.
of 9 parent weekends of Camp Arcadia. You mentioned Casco.
Yeah.
In the book.
Yeah.
So it brought back a lot of good memories. Since I'm brand new, do any of your books in any way discuss the camp experience?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. In
Indeed.
fact, one of the ones Barbara and I were talking about, it's called Dead Man's Wake. It's set in the Belgrade Lakes area. I wanted to write a book set in sort of the lake. We have several lake regions in Maine, but the reason I had wanted to do it was that many people's experience of Maine is they went to a Maine camp when they were, a kid, or their family had a camp on a lake, and that was their introduction. Mhm.
You like Dead Man's Wake.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, blueberries win every time.
Well, peach is not a native fruit in Maine.
We have the paperback of.
Yeah. Well, that's the one I would recommend maybe you try. Yeah, well, especially since, as I say, there are so many people who were forced to go. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's because they were forced as kids by their parents to go to summer camp in Maine, and it was a mixed experience for them. I don't know.
Maine or Minnesota. My sister
Yeah,
went
I'm
to
sure,
camp in
I'm
Minnesota.
sure.
I can
Yeah.
always remember that, where she could hop over the source of the Mississippi River. Right. So, anyone else? Yes, sir.
Is Winnipesaukee more of an urban area, even if it's such a big lake?
Well, Winnipesaukee is actually entirely in New Hampshire. And although I have wanted, Winnipesaukee is, I don't know how it would compare in size to Moosehead Lake, which is our largest lake, but it's very interesting because it's quite close to Boston, Greater Boston, and so for a lot of people, Mitt Romney had a maybe it wasn't Mitt Romney. No, it was Scott Brown, who was briefly a senator. Yeah, it's a nice place. Yes, there are. Yeah, I like Wolfboro actually. I like the communities around Winnipesaukee, but it is beautiful.
I'd only seen it from the air, and there's no state line.
Yeah.
With me.
No, you can. It's not that far. It's not that far from the main border at all.
Well, thank you all very much for coming
Yeah,
tonight.
thank you, and
Let's
thank you,
give
Barbara,
Paul
for
a
having
round of
me.
applause. I will point out that Skin and Bones also comes in a simultaneous trade paperback as well as the hardcover, and we have both, which Paul has signed. I do have a giveaway book for tonight. Patrick, how many numbers we get? 1 through 8. Okay, so in July with Linda Castillo, whom we were discussing
My buddy.
earlier, the police procedural, is an author called Bruce Borgos, whose books I absolutely adore. The first one, Porter Beck, was a first mystery pick by us, and it was just, I loved it. It's a spy story set in the Nevada desert east of Las Vegas and sort of 2 time tracks. I mean, it's a truly remarkable. Have you read this? You have not read Bruce Borgos? God, I should give you this book. Well,
And
anyway.
he's a Minotaur author too, isn't
He's
he?
a
Yes, he is.
miniature author, you betcha. Anyway,
Sorry, Bruce.
he's going to be here July 8th with Linda Castillo, and I think this series is just brilliant. So if you could pick a number between 1 and 8, we will hand this book over to that lucky person.
3.
3? Was that one of the people that just left? Well, too bad for them. All right, so pick another
7.
number. Is that you? Oh, good job, guy. All right, let's see if I can pass that across. So you can bring it back and get Bruce to sign it on July 8th. Actually, I think it'll be a wonderful evening because Linda's a lovely author, and it'll be fun. So if you'd like to get your book signed, Paul can stay right where he is, and you can take pictures and get your book signed. And thank you all very much for coming this evening. Thank you, virtual audience, as well. Good night.